Bang! With the combined forces of Vigor Divine Fist and the Vigor Boxing Glove, the skeleton general's eye sockets cracked as Zhou Wen's fist plunged straight in. The sanguine flame scattered immediately like splattering blood. The skeleton general, who had been retracting the spear with all his might, came to an abrupt halt. The next moment, the bone spear fell to the ground as all his bones scattered around him. Even the skeleton horse crumbled to a pile of rotting bones. And inside the skull which Zhou Wen had collapsed, there was a slight red glow. Zhou Wen flipped the skull around and saw the red companion egg. It was the size of a goose egg, its entire body crystalline, like jade. Blood flames seemed to burn in it. A companion egg. Your luck ain't bad. Unfortunately, you don't have enough primordial energy to incubate a legendary companion egg. Besides, that skeleton general was a little odd. It's best you don't incubate it randomly. Li Xuan was covered with wounds, but regardless of their sizes, they were beginning to close up and stop bleeding. It was clearly thanks to the invincible Kannate divine art. Don't you want it? Zhou Wen asked Li Xuan. Li Xuan shook his head. If it wasn't for you, Miantu and I would be dead. Also, what use is a companion egg? Besides, I don't really take a mere legendary companion egg to heart. You should take it for yourself. Zhou Wen nodded without any intention of standing on ceremony. He directly stuffed the skeleton general's companion egg into his pocket before looking at Zhang Hao, whose head had ruptured. Zhang Hao deserved this, but his death will definitely affect our results. It will probably be difficult for us to get into a reputable school. Li Xuan laughed when he heard that. Rest easy. Once we leave, apply to any reputable school you like. I guarantee you your admission. Shu Mianta suffered grievous injuries and, although Li Xuan's wounds didn't worsen, they weren't trivial either. He was also in need of medical attention. The trio stopped hunting skeleton soldiers and left Guide Ancient City directly after gathering all the bone beads. After the invigilator inspected the number of bone beads and dimensional crystals, he sent Li Xuan and Shu Mianta for treatment. As for Zhou Wen, he headed home alone on public transport. On the way back, he used his phone to enter the ancient Imperial City dungeon once more. He wanted to confirm that the skeleton general in-game was weaker than the one in real life. As expected. It's not an illusion of mine. The skeleton general in-game is much weaker. It's no wonder I suspected that he wasn't a legendary creature. But even so, without Li Xuan to divert the skeleton general's attention, Zhou Wen was only capable of circling around the skeleton general in-game. Killing him by his strength alone was almost impossible. The blood-colored avatar that Zhou Wen controlled had zero chance of getting close enough to smash through the skeleton general's eye sockets. However, Zhou Wen didn't mind. He continued circling around the skeleton general with the blood-colored avatar. Since Zhou Wen knew the skeleton general's weakness, a solo kill was just a matter of time. He just needed to do the best he could. Back home, Zhou Wen continued his daily lifestyle. Apart from sleeping, he would be gaming even while eating or using the bathroom. After repeated attempts, he finally relied on a perfect positioning to kill the skeleton general. Although the skeleton general in-game didn't drop a companion egg, it gave Zhou Wen a pleasant surprise, a speed crystal valued at 13. Zhou Wen absorbed the speed crystal and immediately felt a jolt run through his body. It made him feel as if he was on cloud 9. After a while, the feeling gradually dissipated. When Zhou Wen looked at his in-game stats, he was stunned. He had absorbed a speed crystal valued at 13, so logically speaking, his speed should have risen to 13. However, his speed had only increased to 9, much lower than he expected. After some thought, Zhou Wen roughly understood why this was happening. I was taught that although the effects of absorbing legendary stage crystals are good at the mortal stage, that doesn't allow one's body to rise to the level of a legendary stage. Only by raising one's primordial energy art to a new realm would the absorption of a legendary stage dimensional crystal raise one's stats. From the looks of it, this is the reason. Zhou Wen couldn't help but frown when he thought of this. He originally intended on relying on ascetic meditation to advance to the legendary stage, but after witnessing how formidable the invincible Kannate divine art was, it was apparent to him that advancing to the legendary stage with ascetic meditation wasn't the best choice. But if I don't use ascetic meditation to advance to the legendary stage, how am I to obtain an epic stage primordial energy art? Zhou Wen was at a loss. A few days later, the examination results were announced. Zhou Wen's results in his various subjects put him amongst the top. He got second on the combat test, one spot below Li Xuan. He was ranked even higher than Shu Miantu, so it did seem that Zhang He's death hadn't affected his results. While pondering over the matter, his phone suddenly rang. It was an unknown number. Picking up the call, Li Xuan's voice sounded over the phone. Zhou Wen, have you seen the results? I should have given you first place, but I have some special use for being first place. So please forgive my shamelessness in taking first. I'll make sure to compensate you in the future. We agreed on being fourth, so getting second is good enough. I don't really care for my placing as long as it doesn't affect my university enrollment. Let's not talk about that. I owe you one, so I have to repay you one day. Li Xuan paused before continuing, I'll be studying at Sunset College in the future. Are you interested in joining me there? We can take care of one another as friends. Sunset College. Zhou Wen revealed a pensive look. Sunset College was one of the top schools in the East District of the League. At the very least, it was ranked within the top 10. And there were dimensional zones inside Sunset College, therefore, students of Sunset College could enter them during their college years for actual combat. This was a boon compared to the typical university. Entering Sunset College wasn't a bad choice. The only thing that held Zhou Wen back was that Sunset College was located in Luang City and the Yin family was in Luang as well. Zhou Wen didn't wish to have close ties with the Yin family, thus leaving him hesitant about choosing Sunset College. Li Xuan did his best to persuade Zhou Wen to attend Sunset College, but all Zhou Wen said was that he would consider it. After hanging up, Zhou Wen recalled something. And Jing had given him a USB drive, claiming that it was given to him by Zhou Lingfeng. Zhou Wen had been spending the past few days trying to take down the skeleton general, so he had forgotten all about it. He had no idea what was on it. After finding the USB drive, he inserted it into his computer and opened it. There was only one folder in it, labeled Sunstrafe Art. Article 27 of 1597. Zhou Wen was slightly alarmed. He had heard of Sunstrafe Art. It was a primordial energy art that reached the epic stage and was in no way inferior to the invincible Kannate divine art when it came to fame. However, in comparison, the Sunstrafe art was far more precious. After all, the invincible Kannate divine art's cultivation requirements were excessively harsh. In contrast, the Sunstrafe art didn't have that many requirements. As long as one was willing to work hard at it, even the most mediocre person could attain certain levels of achievement. Furthermore, Sunstrafe art was an extremely potent offensive primordial energy art. It was far more popular than the invincible Kannate divine art that only strengthened one's constitution. However, based on what Zhou Wen knew, the Sunstrafe art was an exclusive primordial energy art of some bigwig in the league. Apart from this bigwig's descendants, no one else had the chance of obtaining it. How did Dad get the Sunstrafe art? It's most likely obtained thanks to the Yin family, right? Zhou Wen had a guess in mind. He didn't reject the Sunstrafe art because of this guess. Since Zhou Lingfeng had given it to him, he must have paid the corresponding price even if it was thanks to the Yin family. Zhou Wen naturally didn't have any reason to reject it and couldn't ignore Zhou Lingfeng's well-meant intentions. After all, the number of things that Zhou Lingfeng had given him since he was young, apart from his living allowance, was limited to a handful. He actually remembers that he has a son. Zhou Wen didn't immediately look at the Sunstrafe art. Switching off his computer, he pulled out the USB disk and prepared to get some food. Cultivating a primordial energy art wasn't something that could be done in a day. Even though he had a 9-valued primordial energy as a foundation, making it faster for him to cultivate other primordial energy arts, it still wasn't something that could be mastered in a month or two. There wasn't any rush. Opening the fridge, he found nothing inside. Looking at the cardboard boxes in the corner of the living room, there wasn't a single packet of instant noodles left. Zhou Wen hesitated for a moment and gave up the thought of getting a delivery. He washed his face, changed his clothes, and prepared to head out to get something to eat. He could also buy some food to stock up on the way. At almost 9 in the evening, there weren't many pedestrians on the street. Zhou Wen had heard from his grandfather when he was young that before the dimensional storms happened, even a small city like Guide City was lit up for the entire night. However, such scenes were very rare these days. The dim street lamps left Zhou Wen a little uncomfortable. His anemia was also getting worse. He had lost too much blood recently. Thankfully, he was young and sufficiently strong. If he were an elderly man, the amount of blood he expended was definitely something his body's self-replenishment wouldn't be able to keep up with. Things would have deteriorated much earlier. I'll head to the supermarket to buy some brown sugar and make it into a syrup for drinking. Let's hope this old wives' tale can help in replenishing my blood, Zhou Wen muttered to himself. He also knew, deep down, that it wasn't going to be of much use. Even if he visited the doctor, it was unlikely to resolve the problem. The only way to resolve the excessive loss of blood was to prevent his blood-colored avatar from dying frequently in-game. As long as it didn't die, he wouldn't need to waste his blood. Cough. As Zhou Wen was walking, he heard a man cough in front of him. Looking up, he saw an elderly man walking over with a hunched back. He had his head bowed, holding one hand to his mouth as he coughed from time to time. Zhou Wen didn't think too much of it as he continued proceeding forward. But to his surprise, the elderly man collapsed to the ground when he was less than 3 meters away from him. Uncle, are you all right? Zhou Wen walked over to check on the elder. The elder seemed weak as he sat on the ground without getting up. He said feebly, I'm fine. Old age is getting at me. I'll be fine after resting for a while. Let me help you to the side. Zhou Wen saw that there was a bus stop nearby which had benches for commuters to sit on. With the elder nodding, Zhou Wen reached out, held him by the arm and helped him to the bench. He observed the elder from the side and guessed that he was in his 70s to 80s. His hair was gray and his face was covered in wrinkles. However, from his thin face and facial features, this elder had probably been a handsome man in his prime. Zhou Wen felt some pity for him. An elder at this age was truly from the most tragic generation. When the dimensional storms descended upon the world, it created pandemonium. That decade or two was the most chaotic and darkest period of human history. And the source of this chaos wasn't the terrifying dimensional creatures but humanity itself. Most dimensional creatures were unable to leave the dimensional zones, therefore excluding those zones, humans in the other zones weren't in too much danger. However, when humans realized that they could have superpowers with the help of dimensional crystals, those who obtained these powers revealed the darkest side of humanity. In this dark era, many vile and ambitious people who struck fear into people were produced. The number of deaths that arose among humanity's infighting could be said to be awash with rivers of blood. At the Elder's age, he was a person who had survived the Dark Era, but he was also beyond his prime for cultivation during the same period. Back then, there weren't any systematic education or resources available. Most men his age had never cultivated. And even if they did, their achievements were extremely limited. To be lucky enough to not die in that dark and chaotic era and live to this day wasn't something worth being happy about either. Humans nowadays who cultivated from a young age not only had a strong immune system that made them less prone to falling sick, but the speed at which they aged was reduced. They also experienced an extension of their lifespan, something incomparable for the Elder from that era. Now, most people in their 40s and 50s looked no different from the 20s or 30s of yesteryear. Even if one grew old in the future, they wouldn't be so frail like this Elder in front of him. "Uncle, if you're fine, I'll be taking my leave." Seeing how the Elder's condition had improved, Joe Wen planned on leaving. "Lad, it's a lucky coincidence that we meet other. Why don't you have a chat with me?" The Elder looked at Joe Wen with his turbid eyes as he spoke with his feeble voice. "I'm not good at chatting." Joe Wen wasn't declining the Elder's request. He really wasn't good at chatting. "It's fine. Let me ask you a few questions." The Elder smiled, only to break into a coughing fit a moment later. "Go ahead," Joe Wen said and stood in front of the bench. He usually only gamed and seldom communicated with people. Therefore, it didn't seem like a bad thing to have someone willing to chat with him. Of course, this was under the premise that the Elder didn't ask questions that stumped Joe Wen. "Do you like women with big or small breasts?" The Elder's question left Joe Wen taken aback. Article 28 of 1597. Joe Wen was still a pure and innocent virgin who had never been in a relationship before. Furthermore, always being focused on cultivation, he had never considered this problem. The Elder's question was somewhat odd, but Joe Wen answered after some serious thought, "Women with smaller breasts." The Elder was delighted to hear that as he said with a smile, "That's exactly what I think too. Only women with smaller breasts are beautiful. What's so nice about big-breasted women? They are no different from cows. Only babies who still suck on their mother's tit will like cows." Although Joe Wen didn't agree with the Elder, he didn't think it worth arguing with him. He chose women with smaller breasts because having big breasts made it unsuitable for combat. It would affect one's sense of balance. The Elder's complexion seemed a lot better once he broached the topic of women. He continued asking in excitement, "Lad, let me ask you another question. Do you like gentle women who are docile and obedient or women who are shrewd and unreasonable?" This old man sure is odd. Does he have a screw loose? Who wouldn't like a docile and obedient woman and instead like an unreasonable shrewd? Joe Wen had the intention of answering that he preferred docile women, but he felt that choosing this would only excite the Elder even more. There would then be no end to the conversation. Besides, Joe Wen had no interest in continuing his chat with the Elder. "I like shrewd and unreasonable women." Joe Wen swallowed the words he wanted to say and spoke against his will. To his surprise, the Elder smacked his thigh before Joe Wen could even finish his sentence. He said in great excitement, "Not bad. Not bad. It's only when women are shrewd and unreasonable that they are cute and fun. Those docile and obedient women are no different from dead fish. What's so fun about that? I never expected a young lad like you would have such refined taste in women." The way the Elder treated Joe Wen as though he was a confidant left him bewildered. He was momentarily at a loss for words. He's a lunatic indeed. Joe Wen was increasingly convinced that the Elder wasn't mentally sound. Otherwise, how could he have said such inane stuff? If Joe Wen had chosen honestly, he definitely wouldn't have chosen unreasonable shrewd women. "Uncle, where do you live? Do you need me to take you home?" Joe Wen really didn't want to be caught up here. All he wanted was to send the Elder off and find somewhere to eat so that he could return to his gaming. The Elder ignored Joe Wen and continued rambling, "Lad, you have exquisite taste when it comes to women. You are a genius. However, you don't look good and your body condition isn't great. One's body is crucial when hitting on chicks. If you don't have a good body, you will be lacking in the strength needed despite having good taste." "What the hell? You call this good taste?" Joe Wen regretted agreeing to the Elder's request for a chat. Having said that, the Elder groped around before pulling out a tattered diary. "You are quite a fine lad and are rather compatible with me. Written in here is a primordial energy art. If you cultivate it, it will be beneficial for you. As long as you can master it, you will have the strength to deal with any problematic women in the future." A dark cloud hovered over Joe Wen. The Elder seemed to be implying that the cultivation of primordial energy arts was meant to deal with unreasonable shrewd women. "Uncle, thanks for the offer. However, I've already cultivated in a primordial energy art. I don't need any others." Joe Wen already had the Sun Strafe art, so he naturally wasn't very interested in other primordial energy arts. Furthermore, he doubted that the Elder's primordial energy art was anything impressive. The elder glanced at Zhou Wen and said in contempt, although this Skyfian treatise isn't a top-grade primordial energy art, it's not anything your crappy one can compare with. Useless primordial energy arts like ascetic meditation are meant for trash. You are a lad with exquisite taste. You shouldn't be cultivating in such a trashy primordial energy art. How do you know I cultivate in ascetic meditation? Zhou Wen was alarmed. The elder curled his lips. Although you don't look well, there's a yellow jade-like luster suffusing your skin and flesh. Your eyes are spirited and your bones are huge. Clear signs of cultivating ascetic meditation. However, it's also at the beginner level. It's good that you are still a beginner, otherwise, cultivating such a trashy primordial energy art would have been a waste of your youth. It would have ruined your entire life. Zhou Wen sized up the elder. He hadn't noticed before that this sickly old man was so keen. As though reading his mind, the elder said, dazed. This Skyfiend treatise is hundreds if not thousands of times better than ascetic meditation. It's stronger than any epic stage primordial energy art at present. As long as you master it, you would definitely amount to much in the future. Although it wouldn't make you invincible, it wouldn't be difficult for you to advance to the epic stage. Thank you. I can't accept something this valuable from a stranger. I'm very grateful for your kind intentions, but if there's nothing else, I'll be making a move now. Zhou Wen didn't know about the authenticity of the elder's Skyfiend treatise, for he had never heard of such an epic stage primordial energy art. Regardless if it was one, Zhou Wen already had the Sun Strafe art. There was no need for him to cultivate in the Skyfiend treatise of unknown origins. With that said, Zhou Wen turned around as he prepared to leave. With the elder's queer actions, he didn't wish to attract more trouble. It was best he left as soon as possible. Stop right there. Just as Zhou Wen turned around, he heard the elder's cold bellow. Zhou Wen wanted to ignore him and leave, but just as he opened his stride, he felt as though his body was being grabbed by a huge invisible hand. It yanked him back, turning him around to face the elder. The elder's turbid eyes were shimmering with a fearsome glint that resembled light bulbs. He sat on the bench as he coughed slightly with his hand over his mouth. However, Zhou Wen could only stand motionless in front of the elder due to the invisible hand. I, Jing Daoxian, have reigned supreme for decades and no one has ever lived to say no to me. The elder glared at Zhou Wen as he spoke coldly. He found the words Jing Daoxian familiar, however, it was only when he matched this name to a memory did his expression change drastically. When the dimensional storms first happened, in the period before the League government was established, when it was the most chaotic period in human history, there had been a vile and bloodthirsty people. The most terrifying and evil of them all was named Jing Daoxian. The legends of Jing Daoxian's cruelty was enough for a novelist to write an epic tale spanning 10 million words or more. Jing Daoxian was most infamous for storming the League government's office, killing 27 epic experts. The rest of the lower stage experts were too numerous to count. He had turned what represented the highest authority of the League into a river of blood. Article 29 of 1597. Many of the history books in the League had depicted that battle, the day of the fiendish calamity. As for Jing Daoxian, he had the nickname of Fiend King. The number of epic experts back then weren't as numerous as the number these days, so to kill 27 epic experts basically meant slaughtering most of humanity's strongest experts. It set back humanity's strength by at least 10 years. Zhou Wen stared at the elder in front of him, finding it difficult to put this sickly old man with the terrifying Fiend King of legends. You are Fiend King Jing Daoxian. Zhou Wen didn't feel horrified because of his restrainment. This was because he knew very well that it didn't make a difference. Do you now want it? Jing Daoxian said to Zhou Wen with a faint smile. Yes. Zhou Wen didn't hesitate in answering, for he had no intention of dying at the hands of this devil. When Jing Daoxian heard Zhou Wen's reply, he narrowed his eyes and said, You may say so, but you don't want it deep down. Even if you take it, I'm afraid you wouldn't cultivate in it. Is this guy nuts? Zhou Wen thought. I'm naturally not going to cultivate in it. If that Skyfiend treatise is really a primordial energy art of yours, wouldn't the League's government believe that I'm related to you if I were to master it? I would also be wanted. Jing Daoxian fell silent for a moment before his eyes lit up as though he had thought of something. Putting the notebook away, he took out something else. It was a violet, metal box that resembled copper. However, it didn't have the luster of copper with its dark, brushed metal texture. Looking small and exquisite, the metal box was squarish, about the size of a cigarette case. Carved on it were strange and messy patterns with 3 words written vertically in the middle. Lost Immortal Sutra. Zhou Wen recognized the 3 words but didn't understand what they meant. The elder held the tiny box in front of Zhou Wen before lifting the lid. At this moment, Zhou Wen realized that it wasn't a box but pieces of violet metal sheets that were connected to one another. They were like violet metal name cards. There was a total of 13 extremely thin, violet sheets. Each one was engraved with words the size of a fly's head. Due to the tiny text, Zhou Wen wasn't able to read the words on them. Jing Daoxian didn't look at the words on them. After opening it, all he did was wave the sheets in front of Zhou Wen before stacking them back together, turning them back into the violet metal block that resembled a cigarette case. Finally, he stuffed it into Zhou Wen's hands. A primordial energy art is written on it. It's rather interesting, so take your time to cultivate it. Jing Daoxian gave an odd smile, revealing his white teeth. It gave Zhou Wen the creeps. Jing Daoxian stuffed the Lost Immortal Sutra into Zhou Wen's hands before walking away amidst coughs with his back hunched. Soon, he vanished from the dark street. Only then did Zhou Wen feel the invisible force around his body dissipate. Having regained control of his body, he glanced at the direction in which Jing Daoxian had vanished. Unable to see him, he hurriedly looked down at the metal slab in his hand. The history books speak of Jing Daoxian as having an eccentric and unreasonable temperament. He does things as he pleases. It's really an apt description. Legend has it that Jing Daoxian was capricious, killing people in a way no different from having his meals. He had no sense of morals. Zhou Wen didn't believe that Jing Daoxian was nice enough to give him a high-grade primordial energy art due to a lucky encounter. Zhou Wen observed the metallic slab but failed to find anything special about it. Without opening it, it looked like a metal cigarette case. After some thought, Zhou Wen didn't check the Lost Immortal Sutra's contents. He had the mysterious phone and sun strafe art that destined him to become an expert. There was no need for him to take the risk of cultivating a primordial energy art given to him by Jing Daoxian. Hesitating for a moment while holding the metallic slab, Zhou Wen carefully placed it in his pocket. Firstly, he was afraid that Jing Daoxian was watching nearby. If he were to throw it away, he was afraid that Jing Daoxian would flare up into a rage and kill him. Secondly, Zhou Wen didn't know if there were any harmful traps in the Lost Immortal Sutra. He wasn't sure if others would be harmed if he just threw it away. Looking in the direction that Jing Daoxian had vanished, Zhou Wen turned around and headed for the supermarket. At the moment he turned around, Jing Daoxian, who was standing on another street, curled his lips. He sneered with an odd expression. I originally wanted to give you an opportunity for catching my fancy. Who knew that you are such a Philistine? No one can live comfortably in this world after rejecting me. You'll die regardless of whether you cultivate the Lost Immortal Sutra. If there's anything to blame, blame it on yourself for not knowing better. Suddenly, Jing Daoxian frowned slightly. Did they catch up that quickly? With that said, Jing Daoxian walked towards the other end of the city, quickly vanishing from the city's landscape. Before Zhou Wen walked far, he saw people running toward him from the street ahead. They were wearing black uniforms that resembled a police uniform, but there were some differences. Despite carefully looking at it, he failed to recognize the uniform. There were men and women in the group, with all of them looking to be in their 20s or 30s. The person leading them was a man in his 30s. He was clean-shaven other than the thin mustache above his lips. He was thin, with a hooked nose, and his eyes were as sharp as a blade. Hey there, did you see an elder in his 70s or 80s when you came from there? The person ran past Zhou Wen without giving him a second glance. However, before they went far, the man who led the group stopped and turned to ask Zhou Wen. I think there was one. He headed in that direction. Zhou Wen pointed in the direction where Jing Daoxian had left. The man observed Zhou Wen for a moment before he nodded and said his thanks. Then, he led the group of uniformed personnel in the direction Zhou Wen had pointed. Zhou Wen waited until they were a distance away before he turned around and briskly walked off. He really didn't wish to embroil himself in such trouble. He sought a life of gaming in peace while schooling. This time, he finally arrived at the supermarket without any mishap and bought plenty of food. Like always, Zhou Wen headed home and continued his grinding fest. He gamed past 1 in the morning before he forced himself to put down the phone and go to bed. Zhou Wen's sleep quality had always been good. This might have something to do with his talent in being able to get into a focused state when learning something. It was the same with sleep. He could fall asleep within 3 seconds of lying down. Zhou Wen imagined that he would be able to sleep till daybreak, but he felt something amiss while sleeping in the middle of the night. In the past, Zhou Wen was able to sleep the entire night unless roused up by someone. But today was different. The room was so silent that one could hear a pin drop, yet Zhou Wen woke up. Article 30 of 1597. Badump. Badump. Zhou Wen felt his heart beating like a drum as it raced faster and faster. It gave him a feeling that his heart would literally leap out of his chest. Could this heart arrhythmia be a result of my frequent loss of blood? Zhou Wen had never experienced this before. He intended to open his eyes and get up to ease the discomfort. However, he could neither open his eyes nor sit up. He wasn't even able to move his fingers. The feeling was akin to the desire to urinate while dreaming but being unable to get up. What's happening? Zhou Wen felt an ominous feeling rise up in him. He was certain that he wasn't dreaming, for his mind was extremely lucid. What made him feel worse was that he felt as though something was pressing down on him. It was growing in weight, leaving him stifled. He could hardly breathe. Even so, Zhou Wen still couldn't open his eyes. Nor could he move. It appeared as though he couldn't wake up from his dream. Could this be the ghost oppression that grandfather was speaking of when I was little? He thought. As Zhou Wen's father was very busy with work and he lacked a mother, he was brought up by his grandfather from a young age. Every evening, his grandfather would tell him stories to coax him to sleep. As for his grandfather's stories, they were mostly ghost stories. Perhaps one of them was the story of the mysterious phone. However, Zhou Wen was still young back then, so he didn't remember most of them. Only a few especially frightening ones had left a deep impression on him until today. One of them was about ghost oppression. Zhou Wen felt that his present situation was very similar to the ghost oppression his grandfather had spoken of. His mind was very lucid, but he couldn't wake up or move. It felt as though a heavy object was pressing on him as his heart raced. It left him extremely uncomfortable to the point of retching. Yet he couldn't do so. This feeling continued from the middle of the night until just after 6 in the morning. Only then did Zhou Wen recover the control of his body. He instantly got up, ran to the bathroom, and vomited into the toilet. Even as he was about to vomit his bile, he remained somewhat in discomfort. What's wrong? It couldn't be as simple as food poisoning, right? Zhou Wen suddenly thought of his encounter with Jing Daoxian last night. He couldn't help but be alarmed. Don't tell me it has to do with Jing Daoxian? Zhou Wen washed his face before heading to the living room. He picked up the stack of violet metal sheets he had stored away in a drawer. It hadn't experienced any changes and the words were clearly engraved on the metal, neither too deep nor too shallow. Jing Daoxian is known for being capricious. He definitely wasn't up to any good by giving me the Lost Immortal Sutra after I rejected him. Perhaps the problem stems from this metal slab. Could it be that he poisoned me? Zhou Wen suspected that Jing Daoxian had placed some form of hallucinogen on the violet metal slab that could seep into the body through contact. He had learned such general knowledge in school, and he did pretty well in his studies. Using tweezers, he placed the violet slab in a glass container and did a simple test. However, he didn't find any poisonous reactions. There isn't any poison. Or could the poison be relatively special and prevent ordinary methods of discovering it? Zhou Wen frowned slightly. With all of that done, Zhou Wen felt that his body had recovered. His heart had calmed down and he no longer felt nauseous. He suspected a case of food poisoning, so he took some digestive medicine. His body seemed to fully recover and there weren't any further abnormalities. As he took note of his body, he began grinding in-game. Now, Zhou Wen was already capable of single-handedly killing the skeleton general in-game. He just required quite a bit of time, taking nearly an hour to kill the skeleton general once. Nothing dropped when he killed the skeleton general in-game a second time. It left him somewhat disappointed. Unwilling to waste his blood to restart the ancient Imperial City dungeon, he decided to venture deeper into it. The ancient buildings were connected like a massive maze. Zhou Wen had the intention of heading into one of the ancient buildings to take a look, but he was afraid of dying, making it a waste of blood. The deeper he headed into ancient Imperial City, the more skeleton soldiers he encountered. Towards the end, he had encountered tides of skeleton soldiers that he couldn't clear no matter how hard he tried. Yet, there was no sight of a skeleton general. This continued late into the night and the streets were filled with endless numbers of skeletons. Giving up, Zhou Wen stormed out of the area and chose to quit the game. He hadn't had a good night's sleep the previous night, so his fatigue was getting to him. He decided to sleep early to spruce himself up for tomorrow's continued efforts. It didn't take him long to fall asleep, but not long after he snapped awake again. He was suffering from sleep paralysis again. His heart raced as something heavy pressed down on him. He felt extreme discomfort. Damn it. It's definitely not as simple as food poisoning. It must have been Jing Daoxian. Zhou Wen had the urge to curse. He had no grudge with Jing Daoxian. He had just declined Jing Daoxian's offer of the Skyfian treatise, and this was the outcome. He was truly loathsome. After enduring through the night, the feeling vanished at dawn. Roughly at the same time as the day before, Zhou Wen once again regained control of his body. He got up again and rushed to the bathroom. The vomiting was worse than yesterday, making him feel as though he was about to vomit out his stomach. Like yesterday, the discomfort quickly vanished. If it wasn't because of the excruciating pain from before and his vomit still in the toilet, Zhou Wen would have thought that his discomfort was nothing but an illusion. He was very certain that the problem was likely a result of Jing Daoxian. To seek him out was clearly unpragmatic. The entire league had Jing Daoxian on a wanted list for decades but had failed to apprehend him. It was nearly impossible for a higher schooler like Zhou Wen to find him. Even if he were lucky and ended up finding Jing Daoxian, Zhou Wen didn't believe that he possessed the means to redress this injustice. After some thought, he took out the Lost Immortal Sutra slab. Without any hesitation, he flipped through it and read its contents. Jing Daoxian had told him that it recorded an interesting primordial energy art that he should cultivate in. This made Zhou Wen believe that the resolution to his problems lay in the Lost Immortal Sutra. Although this thought didn't seem to hinge on anything reliable, Zhou Wen was without options. All he could do was first figure out what Lost Immortal Sutra was before making a decision. Article 31 of 1597.